This is Matt Cuso, and you're listening to The Flagship. Today we are joined by Chris McIntosh, the Deputy Athletic Director at UW-Madison. In his current role, Chris oversees the day-to-day operations of the department, student-athlete recruitment, business development, human relations, and strategic planning. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be here, Matt.
Chris, you represent 23 sports and about 850 athletes on campus. There has got to be a lot of anxiety at the moment. Tell me, what's going to happen this fall?
Yeah, there's a lot of anxiety right now. As we sit here on July 21st, any other year in a normal environment, there's usually a lot of excitement right now. Our football team is usually preparing for a camp and a season that would start, Labor Day weekend, and our volleyball team and our soccer teams. And this is the spring of an athletic department. Right now, as you mentioned, there's a tremendous amount of anxiety because there's so many questions that are yet to be answered. We continue to move forward and prepare for the seasons as if they're going to be played. That's our plan as we sit here today. But, our athletes and our coaches and my fellow administrators and certainly Barry are all, we're not blind to what's happening in the world right now. And a lot of the questions that deserve to be answered don't have answers right now. And there's just no getting around that right now. We're hopeful, but also, have many concerns.
Are there athletes on campus preparing for their sport right now?
There are, like many in our state, at the end of May and the beginning of June, there was some optimism, and it was made permissible by the NCAA that we were able to bring back athletes. And so we have a few hundred athletes right now that are working out in a fashion and compliant with a protocol that is drastically different than years past.
Yeah, describe those protocols a little bit too.
Sure.
When an athlete shows up at the facility, what's the first step?
Well, when an athlete is welcomed back to our facility after having been away, they go through a complete and exhaustive physical, much like they would in the past, except this year it includes testing for COVID-19. Once they clear that hurdle, if you will, on a daily basis, they'll come back through our facilities and they'll participate in strength and conditioning workouts. Weight room and running is an accurate way of thinking about it. But before they come through our building, actually before they even leave their apartments, today looks drastically different than it did a year ago. They're asked to answer questions about their self-monitoring, like many of us have become accustomed to in this new environment. Assuming that they haven't experienced or they don't answer yes to any of these questions about symptoms, they arrive at the McLean facility and go through a screening. Their temperatures are taken. They ask another set of questions, and that's done before they come into the building, and they kind of get through that hurdle. If they're participating in a strength workout, they'll enter one of our weight rooms, and they'll basically work out in a physically distanced manner. You could think of like one squat rack or station per person, and you have a coach in the room that's directing them, but it's not like it usually would have been.
And then it's wiped down after each use.
It's wiped down after each use, and we put some water by each station, and the idea is to kind of keep people, isolated, if you will,
Sure.
from each other on those stations. And following that workout, the typical day would bring them outside, usually in Camp Randall or on our adjacent grass field. And they would participate in a conditioning workout, running at the direction of a coach. And, no more than 20 kids at a time, 20 student athletes at a time on the field. So everybody's spread out. And it was a step in the right direction. We were excited to bring our student athletes back, or a subset of them. It is a step in the direction of having a season. This has gone extremely well. Our testing protocol is held up. Everybody's got a lot of confidence in how it's done, both student athletes and our physicians and our administrators and our coaches.
Are you seeing a lot of positive test results at this point among student athletes?
We've seen a few positive test results, but
Not an outbreak.
Not an outbreak. No. It's been, I think, what you would expect to see, a small percentage of our student athletes. And I don't think it's all that different than what we're seeing in the general community or an employer or something like that. In fact, I think it's probably less, but that's not a medical opinion or a public health opinion.
Right. We won't hold you to that stat.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Are you seeing similar results in other athletic programs of this size in other conferences around the country?
We're seeing everything across the board, from athletic departments who have been reporting their results. There have been departments like ours who have not been reporting the results. But from those who are reporting the results, we've seen athletic departments that haven't had a single positive case. And, we've all read and heard of departments that have had, more widespread, a high number of cases.
Yeah. In those areas of the country, really, where we're seeing a wider spread infection rate across the country. Yeah.
You've seen programs like ours start up and stop for, 14 days and then restart. And, again, as crazy as that would have sounded not long ago, I think we've all just come to expect, that this is the world we live in right now, and you kind of have these starts and stops. And, we haven't had to pull back on what we've been able to provide, but, we're keeping a close eye on it. We're conducting weekly tests, and so far it's worked well, given what we've been able to do.
Have any of the coaches come across with positive COVID tests?
No, not that I'm aware of. A segment of our staff that have close contact with the student athletes participate in the testing protocol. But, that's not to say, though, that they're certainly immune from it. I would expect that, as we continue to go on, that we'll have more staff, and that would include coaches that would test positive. And those are things that, we rely on our physicians to help us with and to direct if that were to come about. But so far, knock on wood, we've been in a pretty good spot.
So at this point, the Big Ten Conference has said just conference games. Mm-hmm. Is that for football exclusively? Is that all?
It's for all
volleyball,
all fall
soccer,
sports.
All fall sports.
Yep.
Okay. So not for basketball yet.
Correct.
Okay. Do you see other announcements coming from the Big Ten on season restrictions, or who's making the decisions at this point about those games?
It's a good question. The conference made the decision to do everything we could to control our own fate, and that is to provide as much flexibility as possible to schedule the seasons and to reschedule in the event of disruption. That decision was announced shortly after the 4th of July. But it was really, if you read the release, it really was an announcement of two things. It was the announcement of two options. One, a conference-only schedule, or the second, a less appealing no seasons. And that's the mode we're in right now. We're planning to the extent that we can for a conference schedule, and we're trying to approach that in the most intelligent fashion to build in flexibility given these challenges that everybody faces. And those challenges differ drastically sport to sport to sport, just by the nature of the sport.
Sure.
Clearly, football is on the more challenging end of that spectrum just because of the contact. We're also trying to evaluate what the environment needs to look like and what the status of our individual departments needs to look like to have a season. And, that question hasn't been answered as we sit here today. And I don't know if it will be answered this week, but, our team here at UW, our football team, will go to what you could think of as traditional football camp on August 6th. And I don't think anybody expects that we'll get beyond that date without having a clear answer.
So what happens to that student athlete in their final year of eligibility? Yep. Do they get to carry that over? Let's say a worst case scenario happens and the season's canceled. Would they get to carry that year of eligibility over to next year?
That question can't be answered today for the fall sports. What I can tell you is the NC2A made permissible an extra year of eligibility for those situations, actually for all the athletes, when the spring sports were canceled. That was a decision that was left to each athletic department, each program, to determine what they thought was best. We actually took a position that was relatively unpopular, generally speaking, in which we didn't extend a year of eligibility to those seniors. And really the motivation behind that, or the rationale behind that, is because we were faced with, and continue to be faced with, such uncertainty around the fall schedules that we didn't want to commit to something that we couldn't deliver on. In the event that we're not playing our fall seasons and that we're not playing football, we, along with everyone else, will be faced with a financial challenge that's unprecedented. And as painful as it was to tell those spring sport student athletes that we at Wisconsin weren't going to extend that extra year of eligibility to them, we thought it was the responsible thing to do.
The decision on these seasons, beyond the health and welfare of the players, the coaches, the fans, you just referenced it. There's a financial almost line in the sand. Mm-hmm. Is that a good way to describe it? At what point?
There's a certain financial reality that's unavoidable. I would say this, Matt, even with that as the backdrop, that hasn't been the factor in our decision making. We have about 850 student athletes, and for the most part, each of those kids is recruited here coming out of high school. And when we recruit them in any sport, really, we make a promise to them and to their parents that we'll do everything we can to keep them safe. And, this has really put that to the test, COVID-19, that is. And there are many questions that are yet to be answered, but that's really been the driving force behind our decision making. The financial consequence will be an outcome of that decision, but it won't be the priority.
I want to change gears here and talk a little bit about finances. UW Athletics was coming off a year in 2019-20 where they experienced a $4 million loss, and they were dealing with that already. Shortly after the decision was made to delay the Camp Randall construction project, how tight is the financial situation with UW Athletics right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's certainly a relevant one. I would say this. The first week of March, we were on track with our budget projections and in great shape. And it's difficult to think back to that moment in time in any aspect of our life and remember how it felt. Our basketball team had just come off of sharing a piece of the Big Ten title. We were heading into the tournaments. On the financial front, we were right where we needed to be. We're managing it in accordance with our projections. The loss that we experienced in 1920, fiscal year 1920, was really a result of loss of revenues that came from the Big Ten basketball tournament and the NC2A tournament, more or less.
Those last 3 weeks of the basketball season.
Yep. Yeah. And, considering the alternatives at that time, that was certainly a manageable challenge that we were faced with. As we looked ahead and finished out the fiscal year and looked at the fall and began to look forward into the fall, it became clear, as I mentioned earlier, when we made the decision around the eligibility for spring sports, it became clear that, this challenge may improve, but absent, some absolute, like a vaccine, it was going to be one that we were going to have to manage. It wasn't going to go away. And when we look at the fall sports, it's no secret that our athletic department, it provides opportunity for an education to 850 student athletes. That opportunity is underwritten by football. To the tune of about 80% of our revenues, in some way, shape, or form, are tied to football. So, the loss of a football season would present an incredible financial challenge for us, as it will our peers. It's one that, we are positioned as well or better than just about anybody to deal with. Coach Alvarez has adopted a philosophy of managing our finances that are relatively conservative. You don't read about, the Badgers making investments in the flashy facilities. It's kind of a need versus want culture. That's served us well as we face a challenge like this, but we're not kidding ourselves either. And as we look forward, there's not a revenue stream generated internally or via an external partner that isn't affected in this situation. So, we face the potential of, and depending on what happens with basketball, we face the potential of a fiscal year largely without revenues. And that goes beyond, what one would reasonably budget for or prepare for. It's one that, we're prepared to meet and to attack, but it's one that will present challenges to us that we've never had to deal with before.
Is there a number out there? What would the loss be if UW Athletics couldn't happen for the season, for the year?
Well, I would say if we go the fall without having a football season, the loss of revenues will be in excess of $100 million.
$100 million, sure. And the economic impact of the state, I mean, they talk about a $600+ million impact on the state.
It was just about a year ago, maybe a little less, that we released our economic impact study. It was $610 million to the state of Wisconsin, just a touch under $400 million to the city of Madison. If I'm not mistaken, that study credited each football Saturday with $16 million of local economic impact. It's restaurants, it's hotels, it's parking, it's concessions, it's the game day share of wallet.
It's a big number.
It is a big number. And, it's sad really to think about the ripple effects and all of the local and beyond businesses that benefit from our events. The times have been tough enough already, and I know that there are businesses and establishments that have been holding out for our seasons to get underway because this was a way for them to recoup some of the loss that they've experienced. And it will be sad if that doesn't take place because it will have a significant economic impact.
Not only here in Madison, but in every college town across the country.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about the decision to delay the construction project in Camp Randall, the South End Zone project.
Yeah, that decision was released last Friday, if I'm not mistaken, and really is one that's consistent with that of the spring sports. As we look ahead, there's a level of uncertainty that delaying that project, hopefully 1 year, seemed like the prudent thing to do. It was made more difficult by the fact that we've been working to sell or seek commitments to the inventory in that project, and we've had great results even during this COVID-19 period. But
you have to love our alumni fan base.
You do. They're passionate, and I think the project itself, the concept, has been it's unmistakable. It's been accepted by our fans. Our fans are fired up about it, but given the challenges that we face, it didn't make sense to take that project on this year.
Well, I have to believe, given the game day atmosphere at Camp Randall, that project's not going to fall by the wayside over 1 year.
No, it's not. I mean, we have all intentions to bring that back as soon as possible. And that's what we've been communicating to those who have made commitments against that project. We don't want them to go away. We want them to stay excited about the project. And we think that over the next year, we'll be able to firm up commitments to, the vast majority, if not all, of the seating inventory in that project.
What's the status of the Kohl Center project?
Yeah, the Kohl Center project is a similar thought process, but it's just on a different timeline. So the approvals needed for that project to move forward, we've not yet obtained, but we've not yet pursued either, given the uncertainty that we face. So we've actually had a phenomenal response from our donors and our supporters around that project. There's a lot of excitement about it, both within the programs that will participate in there and within the community. But like the South End Zone project, that one isn't one that we're pressing forward right now. The more responsible play right now is to see what happens in the fall.
UW Athletics is one of the only athletic departments in the country that actually returns money to academics. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, be happy to. It's something that we're really proud of. Last year, the athletic department contributed over $10 million to campus. I don't know where that ranks amongst our peers. I'm not aware of another program that has been able to provide that level of support. It's something that we're proud of. It's something that Barry is extremely proud of, that we are able to contribute to campus and be a partner like we have been in times when we've been able to do so. That's another aspect of the future that remains uncertain. But to date, like I said, I'm not aware of anyone else who's able to do that or to say that, at least to that level.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those things that a lot of alumni are very proud of. One of the things we like to talk about. So tell me something. How hard are you guys working to reschedule the UW Badger Notre Dame series of games? As a Green Bay native, I'm particularly interested in the one that was canceled in 20.
That one stings. I think back to the feeling that we had, but more importantly, that our athletes had after beating LSU at Lambeau Field.
We all remember that one.
Yeah. And, to be able to face an opponent like Notre Dame at Lambeau had all the makings of a magical day.
Yeah.
Barry is particularly ornery about that one. He has said it took him 15 years to schedule that game. And when we contacted Notre Dame and Barry was able to speak to their athletic director, Jack agreed that the priority of both institutions should be that we reschedule that. And so we're working on that. It's too early to tell how that will shape up, but I can tell you that it is a priority for both us and Notre Dame. Everybody understood what that game was all about and how special it had the potential to be. And we'll see. Time will tell exactly when that takes place, but it will take place.
Well, that's great news. Well, Chris, that's a wrap. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
This is Matt Cuso, and you've been listening to The Flagship.